should have killed me when you had the chance.
Welcome to ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy. Now we are halfway through Obi-Wan Kenobi, with a third episode marking the reunion of Kenobi and Darth Vader.
What have you become?
I am what you made me.
So this seems like a good place to stop, reflect, and ask ourselves, is this show any good? Is it bad? Or maybe is it great? A little later I'm going to be joined by Matt Singer and Heather Antos to get their thoughts, but first here's my take. I think this show is great. No, wait, I have more to say, I promise. Insightful commentary coming your way right now. I want to talk about why this show is great from two perspectives, as a Star Wars fan and as a narrative story. It's kind of weird being part of Star Wars fandom. There are segments of us who like everything Lucasfilm releases just because it's Star Wars. Some of us are a little more discerning than that, and then there are other Star Wars fans that are always waiting to attack some new aspect of anything new. But I'm not talking about you. You're great, but you know what I mean, though. Like, Star Wars fans get hyper-focused on the weirdest stuff, like how goofy Tamora Morrison looks teaching the Tuskens to ride a speeder, or how Leia didn't act like she knew Ben Kenobi in A New Hope.
General Kenobi, years ago you served my father in the Clone Wars.
But all of this is kind of petty stuff. Like, a good writer can tie up that Leia retcon with one sentence. She didn't put her whole life story in a coded, treasonous transmission. And continuity errors in Star Wars are nothing new, like this.
Do you remember your mother? Your real mother?
Just a little bit. She died when I was very young. Just images, really. Feelings.
And then Padme dies in childbirth. But in this show, maybe Ben will share memories of Padme with Leia to close that plot hole. My point is, it's fine. We need to stop getting worked up over every little plot hole before the series is even finished. Now that being said, as soon as this series is done, I am totally going to make a plot holes video. So, as a Star Wars fan, I love this show because it is perfectly bridging the OT and the prequels. It always felt like there was a disconnect between the original films and the prequel trilogy. Different actors, except for Ian McDiarmid. Different characters, different effects, different styles. You know, like everything in the prequels is CGI and shiny, and the original trilogy was practical and grimy. But Obi-Wan Kenobi is the perfect transition between these two eras. We have a prequel character who is in an original trilogy setting. A clone trooper appears in live action. There are battle droid parts on the wall, but it's also linking up the show Rebels and the Clone Wars series by including characters from animation. But what's most impressive is how the series is changing the way that I look at Darth Vader. For instance, when you watch the original trilogy, you think of Vader as this badass who carries this mysterious hidden past.
It is too late for me, son.
It's hard to reconcile that guy with the whiny kid from the prequels.
Protection is a job for local security, not Jedi. It's overkill, Master. Investigation is implied in our mandate.
Now, I have watched the prequels and the original trilogy back to back before, which does alter your perception of this story somewhat. But for the most part, these two feel like two completely different characters. Until this show. When Vader is hunting Ewan McGregor, I really felt like this was Anakin as Vader for the first time, because it's a prequel actor in the scene. It adds so much more weight to the scene and to the story, thinking that this is actually a little boy from Tatooine who's trapped inside this armor. But the series also works great as a single story about this sad, broken warrior. George Lucas's influence from samurai films like The Seven Samurai and Yojimbo makes this story kind of a perfect fit for the Star Wars universe. To understand just how good this show is, let's compare it to its predecessor, The Book of Boba Fett. Now, I've been fairly kind to this show. It was well made, it was well acted, it was pretty fun. But, narratively, Book of Boba Fett was a mess. Throughout the show, we never understand what Boba Fett wants and why he wants it. The flashbacks are placed seemingly at random, and they only serve to withhold information from the audience that we really should have known right off the bat. We learn that Boba Fett doesn't want to make crime, he wants to make friends. But we don't really learn that until the 4th episode, and even then it's unclear. But because we don't understand what he wants, we can't sympathize with his goals, and he's not a good protagonist. Whereas in Obi-Wan, the hero is facing two problems. One is a physical test to rescue Leia and return into hiding. But the second problem is that he is having a crisis of faith. He is broken. He no longer knows his purpose. He can't hear Qui-Gon. He isn't trusting in the Force. He's not even convinced that he should train Luke.
When the time comes, he must be trained.
Like you trained his father? Anakin is dead, Ben.
This is a hero at his lowest point, especially here, halfway through the show when he realizes that he is no physical match for Vader. I cannot wait to see what happens next in this series. But I will say that the series is giving me everything I want, which isn't necessarily a good thing. Lucasfilm is playing it very safe with their new shows. They're sticking very close to the original trilogy within just a few years of the rebellion. Even the Bad Batch is shaded in the areas of this time between the trilogies. The potential for Star Wars is vast. This is a franchise that could tell stories thousands of years in the past or present, stories that have nothing to do with Jedi Jedi or the Skywalkers. I want to see stories that challenge us and make the galaxy even bigger. But I'm joined by two of the best. We have ScreenCrush's own Matt Singer and Heather Antos, senior editor at IDW. So Matt, what's your take on this show so far? Where does it stack up on the other Star Wars shows? What are your feelings on it?
In terms of the other Star Wars shows, I guess I would put it so far on par with The Mandalorian. I certainly am enjoying it more than the Book of Boba Fett, which we talked about on our channel quite a bit. I was not a huge fan of that show. But yeah, I'm really enjoying this one quite a bit. I think so far, I think it's delivering exactly what you sort of wanted from this kind of show, or at least I wanted. Maybe I shouldn't speak for anybody else. I sort of was thinking about it actually in comparison to the Book of Boba Fett this morning when I knew we were going to be here talking about it, and just I think the big difference for me and what I'm enjoying is that while the events of the prequels are certainly very important, and the events of the future movies are certainly on our mind, it's like this is really telling like a story like in the present of the story. Like Book of Boba Fett was so much about these flashbacks and this backstory and filling in all these details, which ultimately didn't really amount to very much. And to me, didn't really inform the main story of that show all that much. And here it's like, yes, it certainly helps to know all of the other movies. I mean, I can't imagine somebody watching this and not knowing that other material, but it's like, you really are sort of caught up in what's happening now and what Obi-Wan is like now and his quest to rescue Leia, and then all the stuff with Vader, who I thought was really great on this episode. And, it kind of reminded me of like a throwback to the classic Darth Vader of like the original movie, really, where he was like the big bad guy of Star Wars. Before the Emperor was more than just kind of a guy who was mentioned and was sort of floating out there in the background, like the Vader of this last episode was like really kind of terrifying and powerful and just mean and evil. And, I feel like, yeah, he was interesting in the later movies, and it was interesting to see how he became Darth Vader in the prequels. But there was something kind of great about when he was just this terrifying dude in this black armor who was kicking the crap out of everybody, and that's sort of the guy you got in this. And I found that sort of really enjoyable and refreshing as well. So overall, 3 episodes in, I have some sort of minor issues that we could talk about if you want, but I'm really enjoying it so far. Kind of night and day, honestly, between Boba Fett and this, in terms of how much I'm enjoying it and looking forward to each new episode.
Yeah, and what you said about Darth Vader, I think, really hits home for me, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, because now we know that big, scary, evil character's backstory, and you can kind of see the intention behind it and the hatred behind it, and it's not just because he's after Obi-Wan because he's after him. It's like we know the story, and we saw him get burned, Heather, what about you? How are you feeling about the show so far?
I have to say I agree with Matt in that this is night and day, a transition from the storytelling that we got in Book of Boba Fett. What is so fascinating about what Deborah Chow and the rest of the team is doing and is able to do with Obi-Wan Kenobi is, we know who survives out of this story. We know, we've seen the movies. We know that Darth Vader makes it out of this. We know Obi-Wan makes it out of this. We know Uncle Owen, we know Aunt Beru, we know Leia, we know everyone survives, but the emotional stakes and tension that they are able to capture and have present in the moment when we watch this is so captivating that, in that first episode when Reva is on Tatooine and has her saber blade up to Owen, like there was a moment for me where I was like, oh, I don't know if he's going, like he might die in this moment, even though we know he survives. And that's a really, really difficult thing to do when you're doing storytelling that fills the gaps like this. That is something that when working on the comics that was the biggest challenge. How do you fill the gap and make it interesting and make it feel like it counts and feel like it matters? And they're doing a really good job with the emotional journey of that, which I think is what we can explore. We can explore the emotional journey and the trauma that Obi-Wan Kenobi is going through, and I think Ewan McGregor is doing a phenomenal job acting and portraying that. And it's really cool to get to see and experience a Vader that is, I mean, you said it perfectly in one of your videos, Ryan, that is still more Anakin. The way that he moves is more Anakin. The way that he fights is more Anakin. Like, one of the big things that I noticed in episode 3 of Obi-Wan Kenobi is the way that Darth Vader, and I want to say Anakin, is fighting with his saber is much more akin to how we see Anakin fight in the prequels. You know, he's not fighting in the same lightsaber style that we see him fight with in the original trilogy, and little touches like that are just really, really cool.
Heather, for the kids at home who may not know, tell us, what was your role with Marvel comics and Star Wars?
Yeah, so God, 8 years ago now, I was hired at Marvel specifically to launch the Star Wars line of comics there. So one of the, aside from the initial Star Wars and Darth Vader run, one of the stories that we got to do in the initial year was what we called the Journals of Obi-Wan Kenobi, where in between arcs of Star Wars by Jason Aaron, he would do these one-offs that explored this time period between episode 3 and episode 4, where we saw Obi-Wan on Tatooine watching Ben scared of Darth Vader out there, you know. And another one of the series that we got to do, the second arc of Darth Vader, written by Charles Soule and drawn by Giuseppe Camicoli, was literally episode 3 up into now, like up into this moment that we see now, where we see Vader building his lightsaber. We see him working with the Inquisitors, not being in charge of them. You know, we see him building his castle that we see on Mustafar. And so getting to experience these gap fillings, like, kind of all come together with, you know, and kind of align and interpret some of the stories that I got to work on and help cultivate, is just like, it's so surreal and really, really cool to see how all of these stories kind of enhance the experience of the films that we know and love.
And if any of you, I know we talk about the comics on this channel all the time. If you haven't read the Marvel Star Wars comics, especially those Darth Vader runs she mentioned, essential, terrific reads. You should really check them out. Matt, earlier, you know, I think we all three agree, like, we all like the show, and you know, we love where it's going and all this stuff. Matt, you did mention that you could get a little nitpicky on it, though. Do you want to throw anything out there, like little criticisms that you might have for the series?
I mean, sure. If you want to, sure. I mean, like this episode, I sort of thought it made me think, especially the sequence where you know, Obi-Wan and Leia are on this planet. They are trying to escape to get to safety. And then, you know, there's that long sort of middle sequence where they get on the transport that's driven by alien Zach Braff, and, you know, they stop and pick up some stormtroopers, and the stormtroopers, you know, get in and they're having that conversation, and then ultimately the stormtroopers get off and go looking somewhere else. And that kind of stuff just generally makes me, like, maybe this is an example where the limits of my Star Wars knowledge are showing or something, but I just don't really understand some of the specifics here. Like, Obi-Wan looks like Obi-Wan still. Yes, he's older, he's a little dirtier, but he still basically looks like himself. He's still dressed like Obi-Wan, essentially. And this is where I go, so the Empire is looking for him. They've sent out these stormtroopers. They don't tell them who they're looking for. They don't give him a picture. Here, you know, like, there's no wanted poster of Obi-Wan anywhere. How do they not know what he looks like? Maybe that's an obvious thing. Maybe you guys can explain that to me. But I just, it's very confusing to me how, you know, it's not like he's in disguise. It's not like he's shaved his head or his beard or he's wearing a different costume. He just looks like himself, and at least is my understanding, like, Obi-Wan was one of the greatest Jedis, the most famous Jedis. They gotta have a picture of this guy they could show to these stormtroopers to say, here's the guy you're looking for, right? and he's gonna be here maybe. Just, it just seems kind of weird that the stormtroopers know they're looking for a Jedi, they're looking for somebody, and here they find someone who kind of looks like a Jedi to me. I just, that's the kind of stuff where I go, how does it work here that we're a few years removed from this, but nobody knows who he is, what he looks like, what he sounds like? He's not making any attempt really to disguise himself. So that's the kind of thing where I go, well, how does this work where, how easy or how difficult is it to be Obi-Wan and move about all of these places? Like, I understand how no one finds him on Tatooine, but when he's walking around looking like Obi-Wan Kenobi, and there are people actively looking for him and come face to face with him, how come nobody goes, you kind of look familiar? That's the stuff that maybe there's a really great explanation that I just don't know from some of the comics I haven't read, from some of the TV shows I haven't watched, but that's the kind of stuff where I sit and go, does this make sense?
No, I hear you on that, just to play devil's advocate, because that's why we're here. Giving a real world scenario, say there's America's 10 most wanted, right? Like, how many people do you know that could just, like, call out and name those people? Or if you see a picture of a guy, like, Ewan McGregor's a very handsome man, but, like, kind of generic NPC white dude, right? Like, just, dude with beard and hair, just kind of out about in the streets, I think it's something where if on the planet that they are on, earlier that morning on that day, they knew, he's here, here's a picture out, go see. But, we didn't see that in the story, so I can't assume that they know that, they have that wanted poster in front of them in the moment. Yes, absolutely. But also, I mean, these are stormtroopers. We know their sight in those helmets is sucky anyway, and they can't see anything. It's probably all fisheye lensed and it makes no sense whatsoever. But yeah, I mean, dude walking around in Jedi robes, we can have that argument and conversation all day long, right? The old man Tatooine robes that got adapted into the entire Jedi wardrobe.
I'm going to bring up three things here. One, Heather, like you just said, stormtrooper incompetence is it's very plot. What's the word I'm looking for? It's very plot contingent. If you need the stormtroopers to be accurate, only Imperial stormtroopers are so precise. If you need the heroes to survive the firefight, they can't hit anything. There was also Uncle Owen also dresses like a Jedi in New Hope. He's wearing the same stuff Obi-Wan does, so maybe that's just how they dress, and the Jedi dressed in humble robes to make it seem they were one of the people. But also in the Clone Wars, Obi-Wan does fake his own death and gets facial reconstruction surgery and alters his voice. It does seem like he would have done that in this time, but then we wouldn't have, Ewan McGregor playing Obi-Wan in the show. So I think it's a good trade-off for me, at least. Yeah, another thing I've really enjoyed about this show is kind of like The Mandalorian. In The Mandalorian, just about every episode is on a different planet. It is a different chapter. It is a different section of things happening. There's rarely a climactic, to be continued moment that takes place in the same planet. Like, everything does feel very self-contained. And I think you're seeing that on this show too. Like, every episode for me feels like it does have a singular arc and story. The first episode is about getting him off of Tatooine, answering the call to adventure. The second episode is, on the Hong Kong planet where he finds Leia and then he learns Vader's alive. So it's this other arc, and this one is about confronting Vader. So I'm appreciating the pace of the show so much more than the Book of Boba Fett, where every episode I was like, why is this just not in chronological order? Because I don't know what this character wants. But it does make me look and go, what I talked about earlier with Star Wars, and they are spending a lot of time on the original trilogy era. Heather, you worked on those books that did a great job of filling in the gaps between New Hope and Empire, and also Revenge of the Sith in the show, like you said. And now we've got the Bad Batch, which takes place right after Revenge of the Sith, which I really like. Rebels, which is right before New Hope. This show, so everything is like in this known era is slowly kind of getting shaded in, just like in the comics, you guys. All the comics take place between different movies in the trilogy and things like that. So as that's starting to happen, like you said, the galaxy gets so much smaller. and everybody's related to someone, or a Skywalker, and now Kenobi has a brother who's going to pop up at some point. So I am wondering when, what is it, what I would like to see from Star Wars is like, let's just go, go hundreds or thousands of years in the future. Give me something disconnected. Matt, how are you feeling about like the direction Star Wars is taking, and would you like to see something just different, or are you content with like where we're at, filling in these pages as characters we already know?
Well, if I had to guess, I would assume that the reason that they don't give you, Ryan, you personally, Ryan, what you're asking for, well, one, they don't like you, so they're specifically, avoiding anything that you actually want. No, I would guess that, again, and I have no inside knowledge at all, is just that sort of stuff they kind of reserve for, new trilogies, new feature films, and that the way that, just based on what we're getting, it feels like, and I think another way of saying what you're describing is that these shows are very driven by nostalgia and appealing to that sort of existing audience of Star Wars fans, and, trying to give them the flavors and feelings of the characters and the movies that they already love. If you love, the vibe of those old movies, that you're going to love The Mandalorian, and hopefully you'll love Boba Fett. Maybe you didn't, but that's what they felt like they were going for. And very much so here as well. So there's certainly no reason they couldn't, branch off into new areas. But maybe that is perceived as riskier or, potentially more fraught. And that once you do, explore those new avenues, that you do kind of, you do sort of pin yourself down to something, when before you explain what happens next, anything could happen. Star Wars is a property that's sort of, even when it was new in 1977, like, it was based in nostalgia. The whole idea of it was sort of bringing audiences back to this earlier era of storytelling and, Saturday morning serials and that sort of stuff. So it's always had that in it, but it does seem to work best when it is also giving you something new and unfamiliar.
Heather, how about you? Is this giving you, what you want from Star Wars? Are they exploring the limits of the galaxy? Like, what would, what's next ideally for you here?
Yeah, anyone who follows me on social media or knows my loves of Star Wars knows that I would kill for anything set in the Old Republic, and that's something I want more than anything else in the world, and the people at Lucasfilm certainly know, because day one I was asking for it. What they have done, the publishing initiative of the High Republic, and the world and characters that they have built in that being so successful, so much so that they are making a television show based in that era, is, really exciting to see the potential that's out there, and just kind of goes to show what a great, grounds of experimentation and seeing what's out there the comics, the games, the novels are. And so I'm just so hopeful that, I'm so hopeful that The Acolyte is going to be as successful as it should be, so that Lucasfilm is willing to take more quote-unquote risks in television and films. We know that the next trilogy and movies that they're discussing will be, beyond in a different time period, or exploring further beyond, the sequel era as we know it now, and that is exciting to me. I just hope that, again, they're not self-reliant on what came before and the characters that came before in order to progress and fill the gaps of the universe. The Star Wars expanded universe has a lot of love for a reason, and I hope they keep, looking towards it.
All right, thank both of you very much for joining me. Matt Singer, where can the people find you?
Well, I'm working every day at ScreenCrush.com, and my Twitter account is @MattSinger.
And Heather Antos, where can the people find you?
Yeah, you can find me at Heather Antos on all of the things, and probably at a local Comic-Con near you.
Can't wait to see you there. And if you guys have any thoughts on this, let us know in the comments below, or you can add any of us on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.